Hello, everybody. How are you? Hope everyone's having a good Tuesday. I'm going to give folks a couple of minutes to trickle in here as you're joining, either heading into your lunch break or you're just after breakfast or it's dinner time, wherever you are in the world. Thank you for joining us. If you are here for this week's webinar, Show Me the Data, how to use your organization's data to build a strong case for nonprofit funding, you are in the right place. My name is Amanda DeFonte. I'm our Senior Manager of Virtual Events here at Bonterra, and I will be your moderator today. I'm joining you live from Washington, D.C. Please feel free to write in the chat where you're coming from, what your organization is. We always love to see kind of who's here with us in each of these webinars, where you're joining from. So feel free to drop that into the chat. And while folks are introducing themselves, I wanted to cover a couple of quick housekeeping notes. First and foremost, you are welcome to use the chat throughout the presentation. We'll keep that on and open so that you can engage with one another. You can engage with us. I will ask that you put any questions that you have for Tiffany or related to the content in the Q&A section, just because the chat, as you can see, tends to roll pretty quickly and we don't want your questions to get lost. So please put that in the Q&A. It'll be available. We will get to those at the end of today's session and get to as many as we can. Last point is we are in fact recording today's webinar. We will email the recording to everybody who is here within the next 2 to 4 days. So if you need to hop early or if you just want to rewatch this and absorb all of this good content over again, or you missed something in your notes, do not fear. We will get that over to you. So those are my housekeeping notes. Before we jump into kind of the wonderful presentation, I did want to start us out with a quick introduction to Bonterra for any new attendees who might not know exactly who we are. So wanted to just take a quick moment to share a little bit more about us. Bonterra makes software for the greatest social good, propelling you and your mission to its peak impact so that you can raise more, match more, grant more, help more, and really do more good. We've brought together the powers of social solutions, cyber grants, network for good, every action, WeSpire, Salsa, and more to really help you achieve that greatest good and hit that peak impact. We've been on a mission to help you deliver life-changing programs for your greatest impact, save time on things like reporting so that you can have more time to serve your mission, make data-backed decisions so that your programs perform at the highest level, and really make sure nothing falls through the cracks, and a whole lot more. So if you are curious about our tools, want to learn a little bit more about Bonterra as a whole, I encourage you to fill out the poll on the screen. We'd love to hear a little bit more about your programs, some of the work that you're doing. So I'll leave that up and running here for a moment. And then I will introduce our wonderful speaker for today. We are fortunate enough to be joined by the one and only Tiffany Allen. Tiffany is the CEO of Boss on a Budget, and which is a small firm that teaches communities to form strong nonprofits and obtain funding, which I know is why so many of us are here today. So you're in for a treat with an expert here. Her passion is working with Black-led nonprofits and other new and community-led organizations, teaching them to use their skills and talents to get funding. She manages an online network of over 14,000 people from across the world who are seeking grant writing assistance and support that teaches nonprofit startups to a combined audience of over 20,000 followers on YouTube, which is awesome, and Instagram. And so Tiffany has a great influence here, and I've seen Tiffany grow in that influence so much, even in the last year. She's becoming a big name over at Boss on a Budget, and I've seen so many folks go to her for advice, go to her for speaking opportunities. So we're super lucky to be joined by Tiffany again, and I will leave it there and let you take it away.
All right. Thank you so much, Amanda. So happy to be here again. Thank you all for joining us today. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and present. Does that look okay? Everyone good?
Looks great.
All right. So let's go for it. So today, everybody, we're going to talk about how you can use and leverage the data you have to make a strong case for funding. And what I want you to do is get your pencils out, get your pens out, because you're going to work alongside me. So the way I like to teach, I like to give you actionable tips so you can walk away with something. So I promise you, you're going to walk away with at least one thing you can use today in your organization. But let me give you just a little bit of background of who I am. Amanda did such a great job sharing who I am, but I have a passion for helping people start their nonprofits and raise money. And so when I teach, I typically speak from the perspective of a new organization or a very small organization that has very little staff. So when you hear me talk, I'm going to have you in mind about how you can streamline your processes and how you can be more efficient. Okay. So I teach every Sunday on YouTube. So if you want more information about how to raise money, how to start responsibly, you can find me on YouTube at Boss in a Budget. I also have workbooks, master classes, and I do free challenges to help get you equipped to run your nonprofit. And I am starting a new membership community in March called the Purpose Profit Society to give you motivation, encouragement, and training as you seek funding. So you're going to see these little QR codes. You see that in the right-hand corner. If you're interested in joining the wait list, just take your camera out, take a picture, and a link will pop up. But Amanda's also dropping that link in the chat. All right. I also want to share, because I often talk about startup and fundraising, but there's another piece of my story where I started in my career in research. So I am a social worker, but I worked for a long time for a research nonprofit called Child Trends. So I worked a lot doing program evaluations, defining outcomes. I was a principal investigator for a national evaluation. So I come at this multiple ways. So I have the experience of using data, analyzing data, developing outcomes and tracking outcomes, but I can also speak to you from the perspective of how to raise money. And so that's what we're going to do today. We're going to pull all of that experience today. So I'm going to make this very simple. This presentation is divided into 3 parts: how to define success, how to examine and leverage your data, and then we're going to get to the meat of it, how to make your case. And my hope is that we'll have time at the end for questions and answers for you all. Now, I just want to make sure that you're in the right place. So this training or this webinar is for you if you are a nonprofit founder and you're doing everything. Or maybe you're a volunteer, or maybe you're a board member and you're trying to get funding for your organization and you don't know what you're doing, but you're trying your best. You're trying to get more knowledge. Or you may be somebody who's the grant writer at your organization, or you're on the marketing team, or you're on a development team, and you need help pulling together the data to make stronger cases for funding. If that describes you, say yes in the chat. And if that is not you, you can also describe yourself so I know who I'm speaking to so I can better tailor the information. But I do want to say that this webinar is based on the assumption that you have some data to work with. And based on the data you have, what do you do? Okay. So my first question for you is, what are the challenges you've experienced with using data to show your impact? So I'm going to pull up the chat so I can see what your answers are here. I'm going to try not to mess up. People say, yes, love it. Too much data, similar data, finding the data, gathering it appropriately, creating actionable items from said data, growing too fast to capture it, collecting the data, not sure where to use, what to use, where to start. All right. Hopefully we can capture a lot of the issues that you guys have today. So let me tell you what I've heard people say. We don't know what to measure. So I saw that in the chat. You don't know where to start, or we don't know how to tell our story. So that's kind of related to, well, we have information that we've tried to make the case, but it's just not hitting well with our donors or with our funders. Or I've heard this one a lot. Nobody in the organization cares about the data. They don't pay attention to the data. They're not making sure it's entered correctly, right? No one cares. No one understands the impact of having accurate data. Or, well, our participants don't have time for that. We have to, make the best use of our time. They don't want to fill out surveys. We don't have time for that. So how do we collect data in other ways? Or you may say, well, we have data. We just don't know what to do with it. So all those things you talked about in the chat. I'm going to address today. But when I train, I like to talk about belief first because I firmly believe that how you come to this, what you believe about this, the things that are limiting you will impact your success. So if some of you are here and you're saying, well, we don't have a compelling story, or we haven't done enough to have a story, I'm here to tell you that every organization has a story to tell. You may not have found that story or found your rhythm in telling that story, but every organization does have a story to tell. You wouldn't have started your organization or you wouldn't exist unless you address a problem, unless you're there to resolve something. So you have to believe that you do have a story and you do have a compelling story to tell. I also want you to know that data are not the enemy. Information is not the enemy. All data do is put up a mirror about what exists, and it gives you a sense of direction of where to go. You have the power to change your relationship with data. It does not have to be contentious. You can change how you look at data, how your staff look at data, how you appreciate data. I have seen this for myself, and I've seen how this has transformed organizations. I want you to know also that you control the narrative. You can tell your story. So don't let what your funders want or expect of you to control how you tell your story. You have to be proactive and you get to control the narrative about the story you tell. And the reason why I wanted to start here is because if you don't believe these things, then looking at your data becomes frustrating. Dealing with your staff becomes frustrating because they don't understand. But when you approach this from a perspective of abundance and not lack. If you start with what you have, what's available instead of what you don't have or what you're not, you're going to be way more successful. So I know it's going to be hard, because a lot of times when people talk about data, they get very frustrated. But I want you to understand you do have a story to tell and you do control the narrative in your organization. So here are three things you can do to pull all of this together to make the case for your organization. And I'm going to break down each one for you. I like to engage in the chat, so please don't mind me. So I'm going to be asking you to, hey, drop this in the chat. Hey, give me your feedback because it helps me keep going. So I need your energy, right? So I want you guys to put success in the chat just to let me know you're here with me, just to let me know you hear me. One of the first things you need to do is to define for yourself, what does success look like? And too many times you're just going by the default. Let me share what I mean by that. Sometimes people put together surveys or they're collecting data because they know they need to collect data, right? They know inherently that I need to collect information, but you didn't start from what you wanted to know or what you wanted to understand. You just started from, oh, this organization is collecting or using this survey, so we're going to do this survey. If I'm stepping on your toes, it's okay. We're going to get there, right? But you don't drive the process. You're letting the data collection drive it. But you need to start and understand, what does success look like for your organization? You need to define that for yourself. And there are two ways you can do that. First, by defining your outcomes, and second, by defining your outputs. So an outcome is simply a change in a behavior, a perspective, a skill that someone has, maybe it's their opinion or their knowledge, right? Output is just how much of something is produced, number of meals, number of clients served, things like that. You should define for yourself what the key outcomes are and what the key outputs that are important for your organization. What are the things that best describe the work that you do, that best describe who you are as an organization? Because the point of this is you want to define what makes the best case, what makes the best argument for someone to support you. So I want you to think about, what are those outcomes? What matters the most to you? And here are some of the questions you can ask yourself. What does success look like for your clients? When they win, when they succeed, what does that look like? If you have a reading program for third graders, what is success for that third grader? That they have a love for reading, that they increase their reading scores, that their grades go up. What are those things? What are the details of that success that indicate to you that you're on the right track and that your program works? But I also want you to think about your organization overall. what does success look like for your organization? What are the indicators that let people know that you function well, that you are the authority in your space, that you are a strong organization? Maybe there are some fiscal things around, you know, we didn't have a shortfall last year, right? So that establishes you as a strong organization, or you have retained your staff through the pandemic. That is success. So I want you to stop getting so focused on just what we look at as traditional data. I want you to start thinking more broadly about how you can position yourself as the best organization and how you can make that case. So you also want to look at what does success look like for your organization. Are there any goals you've created related to your strategic plan that you want to hit for your organization for the year? What does success look like? Do you increase your community partnerships for the year? Right? Do you have any advocacy goals or anything like that? I want you to think holistically and define for yourself what that looks like. And when you're thinking about outcomes, when you're thinking about your outputs, you want to make sure you use the SMART acronym. Anyone heard of SMART? So I'm just going to go through it very quickly. You want to make sure they're specific. You want to make sure they are measurable. You want to make sure they are achievable and realistic. That's A and R. And you want to make sure they're time bound. So you want to have parameters around what success looks like for your organization. But I also want to offer one more thing to you. Sometimes what success looks like for your clients or what success looks like for your organization can actually be measured very well. And I know there are some people who probably in the research world who would throw daggers at me for saying this, but I feel like we have to talk about this, right? So there are some things that your clients may express to you that your organization does for them that's really, really hard to measure. That's really, really hard to put into numbers. How can you how can you measure a feeling? How can you measure a sense of confidence for somebody? There may be some measures that do that, but it's hard to really quantify that at times. So I would offer to you that when you're trying to define success, sometimes the goals or the outcomes that you're looking at don't actually have to be measured in numbers. You still want to know, what does success look like for somebody, even though it's hard for you to put that on paper. Now, I'm going to give you an example of why this matters and how this matters. So I helped an organization start. They needed to raise $100,000 to launch their organization. And they had not provided one service. They hadn't done one thing. And they needed to be able to make the case to their donors that it was worth investing in their organization. And this organization did coaching. So they were bringing high-level coaching to people of color. The name of the organization is Coaching for Everyone. Great organization, look them up. And so I had to develop the fundraising copy to make the case for why we deserved to be funded, even though we hadn't done one thing yet. So what I did was I talked to people who were coaches. I talked to people who had been coached, and I asked for them to describe what it felt like to be coached, because there isn't a whole lot of research around coaching yet. There's some, but there's not much that you can really quantify, right? So I asked people to describe, like, what does it feel to be coached? And I used that information, even though I couldn't quantify it. I used that to describe to the donors what we could bring to our potential clients, right? The success, the transformation that we could bring based on what I learned from people who have been coached. And using that information and using those terms and language, I was able to help that organization raise $117,000 in 5 months. And they hadn't provided one service yet. For those people who are sitting here thinking we're new, we haven't done a lot of things yet, you still can make the case. That's why I always start with belief, because you still can make the case for funding. But even in the fact that I couldn't describe the outcomes in numbers, I could still say, help us make sure 100 people could get coached. I still could quantify some things. Help us reach 50 people. Help us provide housing for 25 people. You can still quantify it, but in describing the outcome, you can describe it in a way that's not necessarily measurable. I hope that makes sense. I hope that resonates with somebody out there. So I want to give you some practical tips on defining success for yourself. First things first, every program needs a logic model. Have you heard of a logic model before? If you have, please put it in the chat. If you have not, go ahead and write that down as a note for yourself to read and research on what a logic model is. A logic model basically is a graphical presentation of the impact that your program makes. It helps you lay out basically your case for why your program would be successful. So if you are running any kind of program that you believe can have some kind of measurable success, you need a logic model. And what it does is it lays out the inputs, so the resources that you have that you're putting into your program, the activities that you're carrying out, and then what happens as a result in terms of your outputs and your outcomes. So you have what you're putting into the program, and then you're seeing the logical connection between what you're doing and what it impacts. And it's such a great tool because it helps organize your thinking to make sure that you're doing all the things that connect to the outcomes that you're interested in. That's really important for you to understand for yourself. But here's the thing. Some people don't know how to create a logic model. Shoot, some people have never even heard of a logic model. And the question is, well, what do you do if you don't have the resources or the capacity? At a bare minimum, this is what I want you to do. I want you to document the outcomes and the outputs in a sheet that best describes your organization. They don't have to be everything that you collect. They don't have to be everything that you measure. But what are those particular outcomes and outputs that really show your organization in its best light, or you believe highlights the strengths of your organization? And what I want you to do is list that out on the left, your outcomes and your outputs. And then I want you for each one to put the target goal for that outcome or that output. So it's important that you measure the number of meals you provide. Well, is there a target goal that you want to reach? It's important that if you're a domestic violence shelter, that the number of women that you serve reach financial independence. Is there a number? Put that target goal, right? And then I want you to outline the target population. I'm going somewhere with this, but starting this process helps you organize what you do, why you do it, and the data that are related to it. But the first step is you got to define and document those outcomes and outputs. When you're defining that for yourself, check in with your staff, check in with your board, talk to your clients, talk to your donors and your funders for their input, because they can describe for you what success looks like. They can describe the transformation that your organization brings way better than you can, way better than ChatGPT, way better. So you want to lean in and talk to those people because they can help when you're describing or writing materials, writing proposals and things like that. You want their input, okay? And I want you to keep this simple. I really want you to prioritize what best describes your organization, because we're all about efficiency and streamlining this process. So that's where we start, okay? I'm not going to let you leave this presentation without writing down what your next steps are for yourself. So what I would like you to do, based on what we just talked about and defining what success looks like for you, ask yourself, what strategy, based on what I heard so far, am I going to implement to help define success? Are you going to look at your outcomes and tweak them and make sure they really describe who you are as an organization? Are you going to include some of those organizational goals and outcomes? Ask yourself, what is something new or something that you're going to do differently to implement in terms of defining success? All right? Promise me you'll do that, okay? Here's the second step. Can somebody put examine in the chat for me, just to let me know you're still here? The next step, the next thing you're going to do is look at your data. What I want you to do is do a data inventory. But we're going to do an inventory based on the outcomes and the outputs we said matter the most for our organization. Okay? So we're going to look and see all the things, all the information that we know we are already collecting on our organization or on our clients. Okay? but I want you to think big. I want you to be different. Okay. There are different types of data that can really help make your case. One type of data you want to think about is demographic data. Demographic data is basically what are the data points that describe your organization or describe your clients? What's the information that provides the profile of who your typical client is or that describe your organization if it's related to organizational outcomes? And then you want to think about more story-based data or narrative data. There are stories that program staff typically hear about, they're writing about in their narrative, in their case notes, that you may be overlooking, that you want to think about. So where are those opportunities or where are those points in your organization where you're actually collecting stories and it's not necessarily for the purpose of fundraising? People are doing it in the function of their everyday jobs. So I want you to think about that. Where does that exist? And then I want you to think about the empirical data. And that's the more traditional sense. So that's the data that's collected in a standardized way. And that could be qualitative or quantitative. I'm taking y'all to school today. So I'm trying to go slow so I don't lose you. Qualitative is that data that's just not defined in numbers, and quantitative data are defined in numbers. That's essentially the difference. But qualitative data it absolutely can be considered research. You can collect information from people, you can collect narrative from people or words from people in a structured or semi-structured way. So maybe you have focus groups that are done at the end of every cohort you have for a program that you have. You do a standard set of questions that you ask. And based on those standard set of questions, you're pulling themes from that. That's absolutely research. So you want to think about all the different types of data that you're collecting when you do this inventory. Then I want you to think about different methods of data that you're using or different methods you're using to collect data. So surveys, typically people know and they understand, right? But you may be collecting interviews. You may be doing focus groups, as I mentioned. You may be doing observations as a part of your program. The program model may require that you do observations of your clients. Maybe there are questionnaires or quizzes or tests that you're collecting. Maybe there are case studies that program staff are putting together for their own purposes that you may not know about. One thing I want you to think about also is artifacts. So images, drawings, right? One example may be you're a drug treatment program and you take pictures of your clients when they first enter the program and then when they leave the program. And that kind of before and after can be very powerful, but we don't always consider that data. We don't think of it as data. When we hear the word data, we're just thinking about numbers, right? So you want to think about like all the different types of information and data you're collecting that can be powerful for your donors and your funders. And then I want you to think about, well, what is the secondary data? So it's not data that you collect as an organization, but someone else collects, but you still use. So that could be test scores from the school, or it could be, you know, it could be, I'm blanking on what it could be, but you know what I mean. It could be test scores from information. It could be something else like grades or something from the school. There it is, y'all. So think about all the different opportunities that you could create or you could find data to use because you're going to leverage the data. This is what I want you to do. I want you to think back to that list of outcomes and outputs you created that matter the most for your organization. And then for each of those outcomes and outputs, I want you to answer these questions. And I would take a picture of this slide so you can do this for yourself. You can put it in a spreadsheet, you can put it in a Word document, whatever makes the most sense. But for each outcome that you're interested in, ask yourself, well, how do we measure it? Right? Are we using surveys? Are we doing interviews? Right? Who's responsible for collecting that data? Is it a staff person? Is it self-reported where your client enters that information? How often are you collecting that data? Right? Is it beginning of the program and after the program? Document those time periods. Where can you find the data? I think this is a huge pain point for some of y'all. You know the data are being collected. You have no idea where it is and what people are doing with it. Where is it? Where can you find that data? If the data are being reported, when is it being reported? Is it at the end of the year? Is it every 3 months? Is it a quarterly thing? And are there any highlights that you can quickly see or understand about the data? So why am I asking you to do this? Because when you need to make the case for your organization, you need to see in a glance where your strong points are. And so if you know that one of the outcomes that you're interested in is your reading scores, you having this inventory and having this document will tell you immediately where you can find the data, how often you collect it, what are the key points of the data. So you don't have to be scrambling around every time it's time to write a grant proposal or every time it's time to write your fundraising copy. You want to have this in the same place. And it helps for everyone to know where everything is. When you do this inventory, I want you to ask yourself, are the data we're collecting aligned with what we said is important? So we said these outcomes are very important for us. This is a priority for us to describe our organization and what we do. But are we collecting the data that actually make that case for us? And this inventory can help you see whether it does or if it doesn't. It can also help you see opportunities where you need to collect better data, right? Or institute more data collection because you may see the gaps in the data collection. You may have a whole row if you have a spreadsheet where there's nothing that communicates what your it relates back to your outcome, right? You looking at your data can also help you see, is there an outcome that we didn't realize we have, but we're collecting data on it and we should be thinking about it or we should be reporting on this? So doing this inventory helps you reveal it helps you plug the holes basically and find the gaps in your data. All right. I'm going to give you some practical tips around this because I know that in order to track your data and leverage your data, it's a partnership, especially if you have staff. So your staff need to be invested in this. I want to tell you a really, really quick story. So I used to work for Child and Family Services in Washington, D.C. I was a data analyst, and we were a part of a lawsuit over 20 years, and we had to report data monthly on 90 measures. Can you imagine? 90 different outcome measures. We had to report data. And I was assigned to one measure that was supposed to be really easy for our agency to meet, but for some reason, there was a disconnect. The program staff were saying one thing, the data staff were saying another. So what I did was I sat down with both and I tried to diagnose what the issue was. And I talked to the program staff and I realized that they had information to prove that they were meeting this standard. They had all the information. They were collecting everything they needed. But what the data staff defined as success was different from what program staff did. So the program staff were not putting in the right data to make the case. So all it took for me to help understand what was happening was to sit down and listen. That's all it took. So if you have program staff and you're struggling with getting to them or getting them to understand the importance of data, one tip I will give you is to talk to them about their data, talk to them about how they define success, talk to them about wins, talk to them about all the things they're doing so you can make sure that you're clear on how they're defining it so it can translate back to what you're trying to do. Because too many times we're coming from the perspective of, I need it for this purpose, and they have no clue why you need it or what you need it for. So I really, really, really encourage you to sit down with your program staff, participate in their meetings, listen to how they talk, listen to the words that they use, how they describe the work that they do, and it will change how you look at your work when you're trying to make the case for your organization. I also encourage you to set up time, like every 6 months, to review your successes as an organization. What are some things that have been happening that you can highlight, that you can share with others, and put time on your calendar to proactively do it? Not just because a grant proposal is due, but because you want to always stay on top of how to describe your organization. I want you to make sharing stories a regular part of what you do, right? So get people used to talking about things that are working well. Get used to people talking about their successes, talking about their clients. Make it a part of your agendas in your staff meetings and in your board meetings. Train people to talk about your data. I want you to report back wins. So if you know that you have to collect data from program staff, tell them where the information went. Tell them that because they entered the data correctly, you were able to show that the organization is helping more people. They need to see and be invested as well. And if all else fails and people still don't care about the data, it's really important for you to have a data champion, someone who's pretty high up, probably the director level or more, who can speak about the importance of collecting data, who can talk about data in every meeting, who can hold people accountable for looking at their data when they're making decisions. So that was a lot, but I want to give you tools that you can use, that you can take away. So I don't expect you to do everything, but I want you to think, what is one strategy that you just heard around examining and leveraging your data that you can execute? And I want you to write that down as a strategy that you're going to use, okay? And then finally, make the case. How do you put all this together? So I want to ask you a question. How do you persuade somebody to trust you? When you're trying to convince somebody to trust your organization or give to your organization, how do you do that? What are some things that have been helpful, or what are some things that have been useful? And I'm checking the chat just to see. Mutual respect, active listening, empathy. I start with listening to them. Use a story spotlight, success story. Got it, got it, got it. Love it. I hope you guys are checking the chat because people are giving you insights about how to persuade someone. And so what I want us to remember is that when we're making the case for funding, people give to things that they trust, right? And so at the core of good relationship building and good fundraising, people just need to trust that you're the right organization to give money to. So I want to offer three things to think about to persuade people that you're the right organization. And there are three things you can do that you can focus on for that. And I just called it my SAP method just to help you remember it more easily. But there are three things you can do to instill trust in people or from people. First of all, show them success. Show them and report back to them how you're the most qualified to do the work that you do. Okay. The second thing you can do is share your authority. So A is for authority. You can educate them on something that they didn't know about. Maybe you have learned something new as a part of your work, something that's novel, something that's monumental in your field that people don't necessarily know or understand. And when you always show up as the expert in a topic, people begin to associate you with the authority, right? And they want to be attracted to you. They recommend people to you because you have established yourself as knowing something that other organizations don't. Another way you can instill trust is share a perspective that other people don't have. So this especially works when you're serving a population of people that organizations shy away from or organizations don't really have experience with serving. And if you have that special experience and you can share the perspective of serving that group, then people again begin to associate you with or as an authority, right? So how do you pull all that together? You use that to highlight your strengths. But before you do that, you also need to understand your audience and use storytelling. All right. So how do you find your unique factor? You need to understand as an organization, what makes you different? What makes you unique? What are the things that show the best about your organization? What are you the best at in terms of your outcomes? Are there approaches or processes or frameworks that you use that make you the best, right? Again, this is establishing your authority. And one grant writer put it this way. I loved how he put it. He said, in comparison to others, How are you the best? How are you the first? How are you the only? So when you're presenting your case, you're presenting yourself as the best at something or as unique at something. So you gotta harness that. You gotta understand, why do you come to this differently? Or why should people look at you over another organization? And you need to make sure you leverage that when you're making the case. The second piece is, and somebody hit on this when they said, listen, you have to know your audience. So you have to understand that what a grant funder wants to hear from you is different than what an individual may want to hear from you. So a grant funder is probably more so interested in your quantifiable outcomes. They want to hear stories too, but they absolutely want to know that, has this been proven to work? Whereas an individual, if you're doing a Giving Tuesday campaign, numbers are not going to move them. Emotions will, right? So know the audience and know what matters the most to them and what resonates with them. And the first step of doing that goes all the way back to what I talked about in step one. Talk to them, ask them questions, talk to your donors and your funders, ask them what their values are. What are their priorities? Look at their websites if they're grant funders. Look at who they funded, because where they put their money tells you what they value. And if you know what they value, then you can highlight the things about your organization that align with their values. Because then what I want you to do is I want you to go back to that sheet. And every time you want to approach a new donor or a new funder, ask yourself, what do they care about? What do they want to know about our organization? And what data do we have to make that case? Because you've already laid out for yourself what you have to present. You may have stories, you may have pictures, right? You may have the numbers of how many people you served or what happened. So ask yourself, of the data that I have, what matters most to the person? Knowing who I'm talking to, what matters most? And you prioritize that in whatever you're developing in terms of your pitch or in terms of your proposal. And the last thing I will say is, when you are presenting or making the case, I want you to use a storytelling framework. Sometimes when we talk about storytelling, people get stuck on the idea of having to tell stories. And some people are like, well, I am not good at writing, or I don't really have a personal story in this. I didn't get into this because of a lived experience. So I don't know how me telling a story is going to convince somebody that they should give, because I don't have that personal experience. But what I would submit to you is not about just telling personal stories. It's about using a storytelling framework. So when you present the information, present it as if you are developing a compelling story. So let me tell you how you can do that. This is my formula. I would take a picture of this as well, so you can keep this with you. And always remember how to structure an ask. And this can apply to anything, even with grants. So you want to have a hook. You want to grab people in. You want to say something that would make them want to care. When I was doing a free challenge and I was teaching people how to fundraise for their organizations, one woman told me, she was in Chicago, it was in the wintertime, and she said, we have kids who come to school with duct tape taped to their shoes because they have holes in their shoes. Her organization provided shoes for kids in the school system. And when she told me that story, I said, well, there's your hook right there. Because if anybody heard that there are kids in 2024 walking to school or going to school with holes in their shoes in negative-degree weather, if somebody were to tell me that, first of all, my response would be, you're lying. There's no way. But that would make them listen. That would make them want to hear more. So the point of you using a storytelling framework is you're drawing people in first with something important you need to say, something compelling that they need to know about. Then you present the problem because you got their attention. There are more than 50 kids in one school alone who we saw don't have adequate shoes and clothes when they show up to school, which prevents their ability to learn, right? It disrupts the learning process for them. Then they get behind in school. Then you start telling them more. Why does this matter? Because you're laying out the problem. Then you position your organization as the solution. We provide clothes and shoes for those children so that they can have what they need to show up and learn. Because not having adequate schools or clothing, shoes or clothing should not be a reason that a kid can't learn. All right? You position yourself as the solution. Then you talk about the impact. As a result, more kids show up to school more consistently, and teachers report that their kids are more engaged in the classroom, right? And then because you're making a case, you're presenting that call to action to that funder, that donor. With your money, we can help even more, or we can prevent this, or we can make sure this happens. So what you're doing is you're laying out the formula, or you're laying out the case, and you're presenting the opportunity for that donor and that funder to respond as a result. So instead of just thinking, oh, I don't have my own personal story, I want you to use the framework and how you present the information. And finally, I just want to give you a couple of tips. I've said this over and over again because it cannot be overstated. If you feel like your story is not compelling enough or it's not landing, it could be that you're not highlighting the things that matter the most to the people who want to give. So most people, they want to give because they want to make a difference. They want to know that they're making a change for the people or the things that you serve. So you have to put your solicitations or your request in the voice and in the perspective of the people they want to touch or they want to help. In a lot of ways, they don't necessarily care that it's your organization doing it. They just care that something is happening to the people they want to help. So you have to use their voice and their perspective. Another way you can go about this is leverage other things to supplement your ask. When you establish yourself as an authority, use thought leadership to do that, right? Show up on earned media, show up on TV, show up in radio, let people see you in your local community. Make sure on your social media posts, you're establishing your authority and you're educating. Write articles, have staff members write articles, or your CEO be positioned as an expert in your space so people see that you're a leader in your space and are attracted to you. Do speeches and presentations so people see you as the authority and want to be attracted to you. And never forsake the importance of storytelling in everything that you do. When you're talking to employees, when you're having your meetings, when you're talking about your wins and you're celebrating, use the storytelling framework so people can feel invested and feel like they helped facilitate that change. Okay. And that motivates people. That makes people understand why they got into this for the first place. That helps people connect with why they want to do this work when they're able to celebrate and feel like they helped something change for somebody. So I know that was a lot, but I also just want to bring you back to how you're going to execute. What is one strategy that you're going to use in making the case for funding that will present a stronger case to your donors and your funders that you may not have been using before you came to this training? So I want to say thank you so much for joining me. You'll see the QR code if you want to get more training or accountability in my membership community. But I will stop here for questions, and I know that I see some in the Q&A, so I will stop and see if there's anything that I missed.
And while you're getting there, Tiffany, and I'm happy to funnel through some of those with you as well. But if you want more resources from Tiffany as well as joining the community, be sure to fill out the poll on the screen. For now, I want to make sure that everybody has the chance to connect with her that wants to. Tiffany, I saw a couple of questions come in at the beginning about the story-based data, and I know you talked a little bit more about it, but I think some folks were kind of hoping for just another like concrete example of story-based data, especially if you, I saw in the chat, have clients or folks that you don't want to exploit or you don't have permission to kind of use their information on.
Right. So if you have some clients that it's not appropriate to show their faces or it's not appropriate to share their stories, you can talk about from the perspective of your staff. And you can talk about what it means for them to see the change or the transformation that they bring about for the people that they serve. Or you can talk about your volunteers. And of course, always, so we don't want to approach this as if we're saviors for people. We are facilitators for change. I do want to call that out. But your staff and your board and your volunteers are just as impacted by the work you do as the clients are. So if you don't want to like leverage the specific stories of the people you're serving, you can also leverage the stories from your staff and your board.
Awesome. Yeah, that's great advice, Tiffany. Um, and quickly before we hop into the next question, I see a lot of thank yous rolling in. And just in case folks want to jump, I did see at the beginning a lot of folks saying they were having trouble organizing their data, really having trouble like keeping track of the right data. It's confusing. They're not sure how to tell the story. If that's you and you want to learn a little bit more about some of our tools here and how they actually help folks with that organization really keep the right data, to help you tell those stories. I'm going to leave a poll up right now while Tiffany heads into the next question, because I think it would be a great time for you to explore. I saw somebody say we're growing too quickly and can't keep up with the data, which is a great problem to have, and when things like this can really be beneficial. So I'll leave that up for a moment. And then as far as, I don't know if Tiffany, you saw another question come in that you wanted to get to, but I saw some folks asking about, you know, how do you tell these stories and how do you collect this data when it's not all from the same cohort of people, right? And that, kind of the programs and people change as events and activities change over time as well.
Sure. So, like one example I would give is maybe you're doing a training, and I don't know the context for this question, but maybe you're doing trainings and that's the only point of contact you have with somebody, but there's still something that you want to be improved or changed as a result of a training that you're given. So, it could be that it's a change in their knowledge or their understanding of a concept. And after, a 2-hour training, maybe you're doing financial literacy and they understand what a budget is now. Like they understand certain terms or concepts. You absolutely can use that as an outcome for your organization because it's a change and a shift in their knowledge. Now, it may not be a long-term outcome. You may, because you only meet that person one time, but it's still an important data point that you can use to leverage and you can, make the case for funding.
Yeah, that's a great point. There's a lot of questions that came through, but a couple of folks I did notice, Tiffany, asking how they stay connected and if there's a space for nonprofit leaders. So I'm going to put the link in the chat again to join Tiffany's community, and scan that QR code. So I want to make sure people know there is a space for you with Tiffany. And so make sure you hop in there. I've seen a lot of people ask for any good examples of a logic model. I know you said kind of, hey, take a note, look that up. But did you have any kind of quick tips for a good example of that?
There are a lot of good resources online for logic models. One of the classic resources was developed by the United Way. I think it was a local United Way. I can't remember what state, but there are a lot of foundations. I think the Wallace Foundation has produced some informational logic models that are very easy to understand. So if you Google that, a lot of stuff will come up for you.
Perfect. Great advice. Um, let's see. Some folks were asking about the idea of surveys when you were talking about that. How do you get people to fill out those surveys, especially when you are maybe working with parents, right, of those who are being served and those people don't like to fill out forms? Like, do you have any way to encourage that data collection?
Mhm. Well, the first thing I would do is kind of assess when it does work well and like look at your processes and see like, are you having some successes and kind of leverage that? But a lot of times, especially with people who are on the go, they may communicate better with texting or doing things right on their phone. Or if you couple the data collection with the program that they're receiving or a service they're receiving. So before they leave, as a part of the service, they have to fill out something or answer a question. It's much easier to collect that survey data on the spot than having them follow up or sending them an email or something like that. You can always attach it to programs that you're doing so that it just feels seamlessly as a part of a service that they're getting. It doesn't feel like something separate. I hope that helps.
Yeah. Feel free to put in the chat if that helps. I feel like I'm gonna start taking your model, Tiffany, here of like, are you still with us? Like put this in the chat. It's been awesome to be a part of. We probably have time for maybe one or two more questions.
Okay.
This one came in from Christy, who had asked when you do prevention work, so if we do our jobs, something won't happen, right? Which is very
Mm.
hard. It's very hard to measure. So do you have any suggestions for telling that story?
That's a good question because I work in child welfare and we do a lot of stuff around prevention. I think one way you can get at that is, are there predictive factors or there are certain factors that would predict whether or not somebody would end up, a certain result would happen. So in child welfare, the result may be they end up in foster care, they end up with a child abuse investigation. And there are certain factors through research that indicate that protect parents from having to do that. So can you measure how you've improved on those protective factors? So one example could be a stronger social support network, or another example could be having food in the home, or having certain people in the home, or having somebody that you can call and connect to. That's a protective factor that may prevent further involvement with the system. So you can kind of measure that and show your success that way. And I do want to say that a lot of funders, especially in like prevention kind of work, understand that. They understand that it's difficult to measure prevention. So it's a conversation. Like it's almost you educating them and you making the case that we know it's hard, but we have designed a way that we can strengthen that process and we can kind of prevent that. And this is what we've done. This is the approach that we use. So you're almost having that open conversation with them so that you're not going at it cold. Like just be honest that you know that it's difficult to do that, but this is the process we put in place to kind of circumvent that. Hope that helps.
Yeah, I think that was helpful. Seemed to answer it for me, but feel free to put in the chat whether or not that came in for you. Um, okay, so this is a follow-up from Lori, who had just asked for prevention. What are the community stats prior to that service, and what are other comparable stats from communities that are maybe similar to that?
Mm-hmm. I think she was offering that as an example too.
Oh, great.
Yeah, that people could do. Yeah, that makes sense.
Awesome. Maybe a quick yes or no is the last question here from Claire, who had asked if you encourage incentivizing participants to fill out surveys or participate in data collection.
Yes, that absolutely works. A lot of times in research, that's what we do. We offer gift cards, we offer food if it's appropriate. Um, and you also want to make sure that it's not coercive though, right? So it's not so ridiculous that you're coercing people to do it. But yes, offering like a $25 to $50 gift card, I've seen that range and the work that I've done in research is appropriate.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing that. And thank you for all of the knowledge here today, Tiffany. I saw so many comments throughout the presentation. I saw Hannah wrote down, I'm scribbling down notes like a mad woman about halfway through. And I saw so many thank yous come through that this was such an excellent presentation and it was packed with information. You did in fact take everyone to school on this one. And I really always appreciate working with you, Tiffany. And I know our audience is super lucky to have you kind of instill knowledge on them. And I hope everybody is able to join Tiffany's community, continues to follow Tiffany on YouTube, Instagram, work with her if that's what you're looking to get some extra advice. I've really enjoyed learning from Tiffany every time I'm in one of these webinars with her. And She always has something new and exciting to share. So thank you so much for being here. We really appreciate your time. And for those of you who joined us, thanks for jumping on with us for the last hour here. We hope it was helpful.
Awesome. Thank you for having me.
Take care, everyone.